Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are strapping in for what feels like a really crucial look at the long game in American politics.
Yeah.
The 2028 Democratic primary.
That's right. Even now, September 2025, the field is, well, it's wide open.
Yeah, and based on the extensive source material you've given us, we're seeing these two radically different paths emerging, almost mutually exclusive visions for the Democratic Party.
Exactly. And this deep dive, it isn't just about, picking sides or candidates. It's really about analyzing these competing political philosophies, these strategic blueprints.
Okay.
So on one side, you've got let's call him the presumed frontrunner for now, California Governor Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
He seems to represent what we're calling the centrist consolidation.
Right, the competence message.
Yeah, competence, pragmatic policy tweaks, expansions, and crucially, this idea of perceived general election safety.
Perceived being the key word there, maybe. And then on the other side, you have this high-variance insurgent challenge, the progressive tsunami, potentially led by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So the core question we really have to unpack today based on these sources is this. Does the Democratic Party sort of coalesce around the safer, maybe more established Newsom, focusing on restoration after maybe a turbulent few years?
Or is the base just ready for something bigger, spurred by economic anxiety, inequality?
Yeah.
Are they ready to bet on a candidate promising that structural FDR scale change?
Even with the huge political risk that come with it.
Right. Regardless of the risks.
So our mission today, unpack the data that's put Newsom ahead for now, compare his sort of executive blueprint with AOC's three big transformational policy pillars.
And then look at the cold, hard general election math. What does it take for either of them to actually win if they get the nomination?
We're mapping the 2028 landscape, 3 years out, it's early, but the contours are forming. Okay, let's start with Newsom then, the current state of play. Because his position as a frontrunner, it seems based entirely on this, undeniable momentum, right? At least as of this September 2025 snapshot.
That momentum really is the story right now. I mean, his rise from, high-profile governor of a huge state to a top national contender, it's been remarkably fast.
Yeah.
We're seeing him consistently, at or very near the top in these early polls. Like, take the early September Yahoo YouGov poll that had Newsom at 21%.
Just edging out Kamala Harris, who was at 19%.
Exactly. Neck and neck, basically. But it's the trend, not just the snapshot.
Right, the trajectory. That Emerson College poll data, that really shows the surge, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, he jumped from just 12% support back in June all the way up to 25% by late August. That's more than doubling his support in just those, crucial summer months of the pre-primary.
That's huge.
And it didn't stop there. By the third week of September, you had that Atlas Intel survey that showed him leading Harris by a pretty significant margin, 37% to 21%.
Wow, okay. That's opened up.
Yeah. And analysts like CNN's Harry Enton, they've pointed this out. His national support started way down in the single digits, like 8% back in April 2025. And then, boom, vaults past 20% by September. That really does look like a strategic masterclass in grabbing that national spotlight.
Absolutely. But, okay, here's where we need to maybe pump the brakes a little. The sources do stress, while he has momentum, no single candidate has cracked 40%.
Correct. That's key.
Doesn't that lack of a majority or even like a strong plurality suggest maybe the momentum is wide but potentially shallow, that the field is still really fluid?
Oh, absolutely. It's a critical caveat that momentum gets him the presumptive frontrunner label, which, helps with fundraising, media attention.
Sure.
But it doesn't lock anything down, not by a long shot. So we have to look at how he built this profile because that tells us about his strategy.
Yeah, so how did he do it?
Well, he really weaponized social media aggressively.
What did that mean, though, just tweeting more?
Oh, much more than that. He adopted this very combative style, almost meme-friendly. It's almost a mirror image in some ways of the digital tactics you associate with Donald Trump.
Interesting. So less conciliatory, more confrontational.
Exactly. He's not trying to bridge divides online. He's fighting fire with fire. He's directly attacking Medjie figures, culture war stuff. And that position, being the Democrat who's seen as willing to fight back hard, that's really galvanizing for a certain part of the base.
Okay. And then there's traditional media, too, right? He didn't just stick to Twitter.
No. He used traditional media very shrewdly, positioning himself on late-night shows like Colbert, projecting this image of a confident, telegenic, polished alternative.
The guy who's not afraid to take on Trump directly.
Right. It's an optics-first strategy. It sells executive competence, but also political fearlessness.
And then there's the California piece. How does he sell California nationally?
Yeah.
Because that's often used as an attack line against Democrats.
That's the crucial pivot he's made. He reframed California. Instead of letting it be the GOP punching bag for overregulation and high taxes, he actively promoted it as a model for progressive governance, especially on things like climate change, electoral reform.
Okay.
He went to national forums like Climate Week and basically said, look what we're doing. This is leadership. Linking his governorship to global solutions.
So it's a dual strategy. Combative towards the right, competent towards the center-left.
Precisely. And that combo seems to be what propelled him from, just being the governor of California to being seen as a real national threat for the nomination.
Okay, so let's unpack this momentum a bit more, because the sources are pretty clear that it might be masking some, deep structural weaknesses.
Right. Despite those strong poll numbers, he's got these strategic dilemmas, this California baggage, as you called it. And it raises serious questions about, the ultimate goal, general election viability.
Yeah. What's the core friction point here?
It really boils down to the contrast between what excites the progressive base in a primary and what potentially repels those critical swing voters you need in November. The data highlights a really significant vulnerability with working class voters.
How significant?
We're talking a 48% disapproval rate versus only 27% approval among non-college educated voters. That's a huge gap.
Wow. And that non-college bloc, that group was absolutely decisive in both of Trump's campaigns, right? Especially in those key Rust Belt states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin.
Exactly. If you're underwater with that group to that extent, how do you realistically expect to win back those states that have been drifting away from the Democrats? It's a fundamental problem.
Yeah. Seems almost impossible.
And it's not just the working class either. Swing state independent, they seem pretty skeptical of his profile still.
Okay.
And then there's the age gap within the party. He trails significantly among younger Democrats voters under 45.
Who do they prefer right now?
Well, according to the data we have, that group currently leans towards Kamala Harris, around 27%, and notably, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is strong there too, at 22%.
Leaving Newsom there.
Trailing at 13% with that under 45 group. So while he might have the front-runner status among older, perhaps more established Democrats right now, he seems to be lacking that crucial future base energy, the kind you need for a high turnout, high enthusiasm campaign.
Right. Which brings us squarely to this California baggage. You called it a double-edged sword before, and that seems right.
It really is. Because on one hand, his record environmental regulations, social programs, the state budget stuff that definitely energizes the liberal base in primary states like California, New York.
Sure.
But you take that same record into purple states or red-leaning states, and suddenly he's associated with, high taxes, those strict pandemic restrictions he imposed.
Which got a lot of national attention.
A ton. And maybe the most potent attack line, the crushing housing costs in California cities.
Right. So let's get specific about that baggage. What policies are swing state voters thinking of when they hear California Democrat?
It's things like the high state income tax rates, definitely. Complex business regulations, the narrative around companies leaving the state, aggressive mandates, like the AB 5 law regulating gig workers. That got national headlines and a lot of pushback.
Yeah, I remember that.
So that association, it creates this enormous strategic dilemma for him. His progressive California record is the very source of his national profile and energy among Democrats.
I got it.
But that exact same record risks alienating the critical national swing voters he absolutely has to win over in a general election.
So he's walking a tightrope. He has to decide. Does he lean fully into the California brand and hope to just nationalize the progressive base enough to win? Or does he try to dilute it, water it down somehow to appeal more to the center?
It feels like a very difficult balancing act. One wrong step, especially in the general election, and it could be an irreparable fall. #tag Lavassie. Newsom's likely 2028 policy blueprint.
Okay, so assuming he somehow navigates that tightrope, wins the nomination, what does his policy blueprint actually look like? Based on his record, his rhetoric, what are we expecting?
Well, it seems pretty predictable, actually. It looks like a platform built squarely on, I'd say, restoration, competence, and sort of targeted progressive expansion.
Right, intentionally avoiding the really big structural shocks that someone like AOC might propose.
Exactly. It's ambitious within the current system, but not trying to remake the system itself.
So what's pillar number one?
Pillar number one, arguably the most central, is this idea of defending democracy.
Okay.
He's been hammering this theme already, repeatedly accusing Trump of authoritarian tendencies, positioning himself not just as a policy alternative, but as, like, the guardian of institutions.
Protecting voting rights, checks and balances.
All of it. His platform would absolutely focus on resisting Trumpism directly, trying to make the 2028 race a referendum on constitutional norms, essentially.
Okay, makes sense. What's next? Climate. That seems like his home turf.
Absolutely. Climate and environmental leadership. This is where he can claim undeniable executive authority based on his California record.
Right.
Think about California's big laws on accelerating renewable energy, cutting emissions, setting vehicle standards. That would basically become the national blueprint.
So push the U.S. to reclaim global leadership on climate.
Yeah, leveraging his track record to say, we've done this, we know how to do it, claiming tangible action, not just, aspirational goals.
Okay. And economically, what's the plan there? Economic equity.
Here, you really see that focus on expanding existing successful democratic policies. It's the definition of incremental progress, basically.
Right. Strengthening the ACA.
Definitely. Significantly expanding the Affordable Care Act, promising broader access to health care coverage, and also trying to scale up successful California initiatives nationally.
Such as?
Well, things like universal pre-K, expanded childcare programs. California's invested heavily in building out a state-supported pre-K system, for example.
Yeah.
Newsom would propose doing that federally, replicating those investments. It's a clear benefit pitch to families, but it works within the existing structures. It's not blowing things up.
Got it. What else is key to his likely platform?
Electoral reform feels like a centerpiece, too, and it ties directly back to that defending democracy narrative.
Awesome.
Emphasizing fair maps, stronger federal voting rights protections, pushing for independent redistricting commissions nationwide.
Like California did with Prop 50.
Exactly. Citing that as a model for taking redistricting power away from partisan state legislatures.
Okay. And what about the tone? You mentioned his combative style earlier. Does that translate into policy?
It translates into the overall populist messaging, I think. That approach of fighting back, selling the anti-MAGA merchandise, engaging in that sharp rhetoric.
It's not just talk.
No, it's a deliberate strategy. It's meant to galvanize Democrats who are tired of what they see as maybe Democratic timidity in the past. He's choosing to be the fighter.
Even if it polarizes independents.
Right. The calculation seems to be that maximizing base turnout in the primary, and maybe even the general, is worth potentially turning off some swing voters.
So putting it all together, his blueprint is ambitious, yes, but fundamentally non-disruptive to the core economic structures of the country.
That's a good way to put it. It's aiming for maybe the highest version of democratic governance we've seen within the established rules, but it's still operating within those rules.
Okay, and that non-disruptive nature, that brings us perfectly to the challenger with maybe the highest variance, right? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Exactly. If Newsom is the restoration candidate,
AOC is the revolution.
pretty much. Her path, which the sources describe as this progressive tsunami, it's built on a fundamentally different core bet.
Which is?
The bet is that the existing system isn't just flawed, it's fundamentally broken and needs to be replaced, or at least radically restructured.
Okay. And how does she plan to do that? What's the strategy?
The core strategy seems to be movement first, legislation second.
Meaning
aiming to coalesce huge numbers of politically disillusioned people, young voters, renters, working-class folks who feel left behind around three very concrete structural policy pillars.
not just vague promises.
Absolutely not. She seems to understand that broad promises just don't cut it anymore. The policy proposals have to be big enough, bold enough to either scare the party elites into compliance or attract them because they see a path to victory.
And crucially, they have to offer a credible path to immediate relief for households.
Yeah.
People need to feel it.
Right. Tangible benefits. She's essentially asking if she can nationalize a kind of insurgent realignment, something that feels more like, the New Deal or the Reagan Revolution in terms of its impact, rather than just a fleeting protest vote.
That's a huge gamble. And it seems like the entire thing hinges on making these three big policy pillars seem not just desirable, but tangible and fiscally defensible.
Exactly. It all comes down to the details of those pillars.
Okay, let's break them down. Pillar number one, the 70% top marginal tax rate. This is the big one, the headline grabber.
It is. And it's explicitly tied, it's important to note, to ultra-high incomes, usually framed as applying only to income above something like $10 million a year.
Right, so the political target is extremely narrow. But still, 70%. That sounds astronomical to most people today. What's the historical case she can make for that?
Well, the historical case is actually pretty strong. The U.S. had top marginal tax rates at or above 70% for decades.
Really?
When? Think post-World War II. It peaked above 90% in the 1940s and 50s and stayed high through the 60s and 70s. These were periods of strong economic growth, by the way.
So the big cuts didn't really start until the 80s.
Exactly. So this history gives AOC the political cover to argue, look, taxing the very wealthy very heavily isn't radical. It's actually historically normal for America.
Okay. And what about the economic theory? Does that back it up? You hear names like Piketty, Soyez, that Sheva mentioned.
Right. Their work on optimal taxation is key here. It revolves around this concept called the elasticity of taxable income, or ETI.
Which means,
basically, how much do people change their reported income through avoidance, working less, etc., when the tax rate changes? There's a point, the theory suggests, where raising the rate further doesn't bring in much more revenue because people change their behavior too much.
okay.
But that optimal point, the rate that maximizes revenue from top earners after accounting for that avoidance behavior, the research suggests it's actually around 70%.
70% is the sweet spot, theoretically.
Theoretically, yes. And the philosophical goal isn't really to punish success. It's more aimed at curbing what economists call rent-seeking,
Meaning?
where the very wealthy spend resources influencing policy, finding loopholes, or just shuffling assets rather than investing in productive innovation. The high tax rate makes those non-productive activities less worthwhile.
Okay, I see the theory. But politically, that number, 70%, it just sounds toxic. How does she possibly sell that without being hammered as anti-success, anti-growth?
That's the challenge. The messaging has to be relentless. First, frame it as FDR fairness, invoking that historical precedent. Second, and this is absolutely crucial, she must tie that revenue directly and visibly to the tangible benefits people will receive.
So not just will reduce the deficit, but this tax on millionaires pays for your free health care, your lower rent, your childcare.
Exactly. People need to see and feel the benefit before the tax rate itself becomes the main point of attack. The connection has to be immediate and concrete.
Okay. And if we contrast that with Newsom.
Newsom would likely be fine with raising corporate taxes, maybe capital gains taxes, things that poll well generally.
But he'd avoid that 70% number like the plague.
Absolutely. He'd position himself as the fiscally serious, responsible one, safer for the general election. He doesn't want to get bogged down debating optimal tax theory on the campaign trail.
Okay, pillar number 2. This tackles the housing crisis, which is huge, especially for younger voters and renters. The idea is Vienna-style social housing.
Right, and Vienna provides this incredibly powerful real-world proof of concept. It's not theoretical.
So, for listeners maybe not familiar with the Vienna model, what's the core idea? Why does it work so well to keep costs down there?
It's transformational because it fundamentally changes how housing is provided. In Vienna, something like 40 to 43% of all homes are either directly owned and managed by the city, that's the social housing part, or they're developed by nonprofit limited equity cooperatives.
Okay. And the key is?
The key is that the rents in these units are based on the cost of building and maintaining them, not on whatever the private market will bear.
Delinking from market speculation.
Exactly. And the result is rents that are roughly 30% lower on average than in the private market.
30% lower. Wow.
And this allows for genuinely mixed income communities. You hear that phrase, doctors living next to janitors. It's actually true there because housing costs are manageable across the board. It insulates a huge chunk of the population from housing market volatility.
Okay, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But scaling that up in the U.S., the challenge seems astronomical. How does AOC propose actually funding and building this? Homes like Vienna moonshot.
Yeah, it would be a moonshot. It requires 3 things the U.S. just doesn't have right now, at least not at scale. First, massive scale. We're talking millions of units.
Right.
Second, dedicated federal capital. Serious long-term funding streams. Vienna spends hundreds of millions every year, and they have dedicated revenue sources like municipal levies specifically for housing.
Okay.
And third, state and local capacity. You need streamlined zoning, public land banks to get land cheaply, and the actual capability to build or oversee the building of housing on a massive scale. It can't just be one-off grants.
So AOC's pitch would have to include A federal housing authority.
Gotta be something like that. A federal social housing authority, maybe using public land banks, maybe focusing on bulk building techniques to lower costs.
And the funding.
It has to be explicitly tied back to that top tax rate hike. Maybe also a financial transactions tax. Again, tying the revenue directly to the benefit. We tax Wall Street and the super rich to build homes you can actually afford.
Okay. And how does Newsom's approach compare on housing?
Newsom would likely offer what you might call a centrist housing package. Still ambitious, but working within the current system.
So things like zoning reform, more vouchers?
Exactly. Supporting federal incentives for zoning reform, maybe expanding rental assistance vouchers, and crucially, probably expanding the low-income housing tax credit, LIHTC.
Remind us what LIHTC is again.
It's the main federal tool we use now. It gives tax credits to private developers as an incentive to include a certain percentage of affordable units in their projects.
So Newsom's plan relies on private market incentives to create affordability.
Right. It's about tweaking the market. AOC's plan is fundamentally different. It's about taking a significant portion of the housing supply out of the speculative market altogether through public or nonprofit ownership.
Regime change versus system modification.
That's a good way to think about it.
All right, pillar number 3, maybe the biggest, most complex one fiscally. Single-payer healthcare. Medicare for all.
Yeah, this is always the elephant in the room for progressive policy.
Let's just address the budget mechanics head on. We hear these massive numbers, trillions of dollars. What's actually happening there?
Okay, we need to be precise here. When studies, like the one from the Mercatus Center, estimate these huge costs, like that $32.6 trillion over 10 years figure you often hear,
Yeah.
that number represents the massive shift of spending from the private sector, employer premiums, individual out-of-pocket costs, onto the federal government's books.
Ah, so it's not necessarily $32 trillion in new spending in the economy. It's federal spending increasing by that much because it's taking over private spending.
Exactly. The total amount spent on healthcare in the entire system might go up, stay the same, or even go down, depending on the details. But the federal budget part definitely gets much, much bigger.
Okay, but hold on. Even if the total cost might not explode politically, shifting $32 trillion onto the federal ledger, I mean, the attack ads write themselves, right? She's going to bankrupt the country. How does she counter that?
That is the core political battle. The entire debate about the total system cost hinges on whether a single-payer system run by the federal government can achieve massive administrative savings.
Because you get rid of private insurance overhead.
Right. And crucially, whether it can use its negotiating power to dramatically lower the payment rates to doctors, hospitals, drug companies.
Which the private insurance system struggles to do effectively.
Correct. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, has pointed out that different versions of Medicare for All can have wildly different fiscal outcomes depending entirely on those payment rates. If you pay providers something close to current Medicare rates, which are lower than private rates, the total system cost could actually fall significantly.
Big if there.
Huge if. And politically, it's incredibly tough. Public opinion is really volatile on this.
How so?
Well, support for the idea of Medicare for All is generally pretty strong. People like the concept of guaranteed coverage. But that support drops, often dramatically, as soon as you start talking about the specific tax increases needed to pay for it, or when people hear they might lose their current employer-provided health plan, even if the new plan is better.
Right. The fear of disruption.
Exactly. So that's AOC's primary tactical hurdle here. Her messaging has to be laser-focused on guaranteed care, plea lower overall bills for your family.
Okay.
And she absolutely must publish a concrete, detailed, transparent financing plan, not just vague promises.
Oh, what that look like?
It means explicitly listing where the money comes from. Maybe a payroll tax split, but heavily weighted towards higher earners. Maybe that financial transactions tax, definitely the 70% top rate hike revenue.
And connecting it to household savings.
Critically, she needs tools like online calculators where people can plug in their income and see, okay, my taxes go up by X, but I save Y on premiums and deductibles, so I come out ahead. She has to prove that for, say, 95% of Americans, they are financially better off under her plan.
That's a tall order.
Extremely.
And Newsom's path here, again, safer route.
Absolutely, the low-risk centrist route. Strengthen the ACA, expand existing programs like Medicaid and CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program.
Cap out-of-pocket costs, maybe.
A public option.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe allow people to buy into a government-run public option plan alongside private plans It's much less system disruption, much lower perceived fiscal risk.
But also much less transformational for people really struggling with healthcare costs today, even with the ACA.
That's the trade-off, plain and simple.
Okay, so we have these two starkly different policy contracts potentially heading towards 2028. Let's game this out. Assume, somehow, the progressive tsunami works, AOC overcomes the establishment forces and wins the Democratic primary. How on earth does she then achieve general election viability?
Yeah, the primary is one thing, winning the whole country is another. This is where the VP ticket mathematics become absolutely critical and pretty ruthless.
What does the coalition math look like for her? Who does she need to win?
Well, she obviously needs the full progressive base mobilized at maximum energy, no question.
Right. But that's not enough. She has to win over a critical slice of moderates and independents, many of whom were probably pretty skeptical of her during the primary.
The same voters Newsom might appeal to more easily.
Exactly. We know voters generally support taxing the rich, but we also know that taxes alone are rarely the top issue that drives their vote.
It has to be linked to benefits.
Visible, immediate benefits. That homes, health, dignity contract has to feel real and deliverable to mobilize those swing voters, not just the base.
So her winning script needs that policy contract. It needs massive endorsements from unions, community groups. What else?
And a smart electoral map strategy. Probably focusing heavily on states with high youth populations, high numbers of renters, places like Nevada, Arizona, maybe Colorado, Georgia.
Okay. But even with all that, to win the presidency, the ticket needs something else, doesn't it? Like a sense of executive competence, some swing state reassurance.
Absolutely. And this is where the vice presidential pick becomes probably the most important decision she'd make. The source material lays out two really powerful but very different options for her. Hashtag analysis of AOC's potential running mates.
Right. Let's analyze those two potential running mates discussed.
Yeah.
Pete Buttigieg and Josh Shapiro. These seem like a study in contrasts strategically.
They really are. They represent totally different strategic trade-offs for an AOC ticket.
Okay, start with AOC Buttigieg. What's the upside there?
Well, the big upside is message coherence and that sort of polished appeal to upscale suburbanites.
Oh, so?
Buttigieg is an incredibly effective communicator. He's crisp, articulate, very media savvy. He tends to test well with those college-educated suburban voters, both Democrats and independents, who have become really crucial for the party in recent elections.
Okay.
He also brings that undeniable military veteran credibility, which always helps balance a ticket, addresses the commander-in-chief readiness question.
Right, and his time as transportation secretary, is that a plus or minus?
It's mixed, but there are potential pluses. While it was controversial, his DOT tenure did produce some tangible consumer wins, things like pushing airlines on fee transparency, automatic refunds. That actually fits quite well with AOC's kind of benefits-first, anti-corporate consumer focus.
Okay, so those are the upsides.
Yeah.
What about the liabilities? They seem significant too.
They are. First, he doesn't bring a built-in state advantage. He's from Indiana, not a swing state. So the ticket still has a tough fight in the crucial Rust Belt.
Right.
Second, the GOP would absolutely hammer the DOT baggage relentlessly. You know, the supply chain issues during his tenure, and especially the response to the East Palestine train derailment.
That becomes an immediate attack surface about competence.
Exactly. Screams lack of competence, whether fair or not. And third, let's be honest, he struggled significantly to connect with black voters during the 2020 primary. That's a potential weakness within the Democratic coalition.
So, net-net on AOC Buttigieg.
It feels like the choice you make if you're prioritizing a policy competence brand. If you're trying to win back those college-educated independents and suburbanites nationally. But it leaves AOC with a much heavier lift in those core electoral college battlegrounds. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan.
Okay. And that structural weakness in the Rust Belt points us directly to the alternative scenario, AOC Shapiro.
Right. This ticket screams Rust Belt realism and tangible executive competence.
How so? What makes Shapiro such a strong contrast?
Well, the biggest asset is simple geography and performance. He is the sitting popular governor of Pennsylvania.
Arguably the single most important swing state.
You could definitely argue that. And he didn't just win in 2022, he won by nearly 15 points. That is a landslide in a state as competitive as Pennsylvania.
15 points is huge.
It's monumental. If you put him on the ticket, you arguably make Pennsylvania much, much harder for the Republicans to win. Locking down PA dramatically changes the whole electoral map calculus, makes the path to 270 electoral votes significantly easier.
Okay. And beyond the electoral math, what's his brand?
The sources really highlight his gets things done execution narrative.
Right, that I-95 collapse story.
Exactly. That incredibly fast, highly visible management of the I-95 highway collapse in Philadelphia, reopening it in just 12 days. Why is that anecdote so powerful?
Because it's concrete proof of competence.
It's concrete, undeniable proof of executive action under pressure. It completely balances AOC's huge transformational policy ideas with proof that government can actually execute complex projects quickly and efficiently. No bureaucratic delays, just speed, efficiency, visible results.
That's a powerful counter-narrative to Republican attacks about big government being slow and incompetent.
Precisely. Plus, he generally has strong appeal with labor unions, which is also critical in the Rust Belt.
Okay, sounds like a strong pick. What are the liabilities then? Because there must be some.
Oh, definitely. And the liabilities here are almost the mirror image of the Buttigieg ticket. It's less about external attacks and more about potential internal party friction.
Meaning friction with the progressive base.
Exactly. Shapiro is significantly more moderate than AOC on several key issues, particularly foreign policy. His more hawkish stance on Israel and Gaza, for instance, could cause major heartburn for the progressive base, which is AOC's core strength.
Any other issues?
Yeah, his past openness to school vouchers, even if nuanced, would absolutely be weaponized by activists on the left as proof of ideological impurity, a betrayal of public education.
So, weighing the nets here, AOC Shapiro is the choice for.
It seems like the choice for pure electoral college realism. You might compromise on some ideological purity, you might risk some base enthusiasm dropping, but you gain this immense tactile advantage of potentially locking down Pennsylvania.
And balancing the ticket. The transformational progressive plus the proven executive.
Exactly. It balances the pitch.
And the attack lines would be different for each ticket too, right?
Completely predictable. For AOC Shapiro, the GOP hammers party divided on Israel. He supported vouchers. For AOC Buttigieg, it's nonstop DOT fiascos, supply chain chaos, and they're both too far left, too inexperienced to govern.
So the VP choice really is a signal, isn't it? A pragmatic signal to the party establishment and voters about what the priority is.
Absolutely. Is the priority ideological coherence across the ticket? Or is it maximizing the odds of winning the Electoral College, even if it means some internal contradictions? #TagTags. Conclusion and final thought.
Wow. Okay, so stepping back, the 2028 Democratic primary landscape, even looking at it this early in 2025, it really does present this incredibly clear fork in the road.
It really does. The party seems poised to have to make a fundamental choice. Do they want that FDR scale reset, the kind of high variance, potentially high reward strategy represented by AOC?
Or do they opt for the competence first restoration, the lower variance, arguably lower risk approach embodied by someone like Newsom?
Newsom's path, his lane, seems to succeed if Democrats ultimately prioritize what they perceive as electability and executive competence above all else, even above deep structural change.
He's the safe bet, maybe.
Arguably. But, as we discussed, he comes with those deep flaws, especially with non-college workers, that could absolutely cost him the Rust Belt in the election.
Right. And AOC's lane. When does that succeed?
Her lane only works, it seems, if she can successfully translate genuine economic pain and anxiety into a credible benefits-first policy contract.
And crucially, avoid being defined by the opposition simply as great goals, fuzzy math.
Exactly. The numbers have to add up, and the benefits have to feel real and imminent.
So, for you, the listener, the informed observer, trying to make sense of this as it unfolds, what should you be watching for? What are the critical early indicators that might tell us which way the party, both the establishment and the base, is really leaning?
The sources give us a few things to track. First, keep a close eye on issue polling, but specifically how the questions are framed.
Not just, do you support a 70% tax rate?
Right. Look for polls that frame it with the benefit attached, something like, would you support building publicly owned homes with rents 30% below market, funded by a 70% tax rate only on income over $10 million?
If the concrete benefit starts to consistently outweigh the fear of the tax number in those polls.
That's a sign the progressive argument is gaining traction, potentially favoring an AOC-type candidate.
Okay. What's the second indicator?
Youth engagement and turnout intent. We know young voters are crucial for a progressive coalition.
So watch registration numbers, volunteer signups.
Exactly. If that youth cohort starts moving decisively and early, not just showing poll support, but actually registering, organizing, volunteering, that's the literal fuel needed for that progressive tsunami. That's what could potentially overwhelm established preferences.
Got it. And the third thing to watch?
This one's maybe a bit more inside baseball, but pay extremely close attention to the signals coming from the powerful healthcare industry providers, hospitals, insurers.
What kind of signals?
Their early reactions, whether it's immediate fierce opposition or perhaps more cautious engagement to any concrete single-payer proposals, especially concerning those provider payment rates we talked about.
If they start hedging or signaling willingness to negotiate,
That's a very strong signal that the policy, Medicare for All, is being taken seriously by the financial establishment, that it's achieved a certain level of perceived viability. If they just dismiss it out of hand, it likely stays on the fringe.
okay, those are really useful indicators. It feels like this is shaping up to be more than just a standard political primary.
I think it is. The ultimate battle in 2028, at least on the Democratic side, might not just be between Democrats and Republicans. It might be an internal battle within the Democratic Party itself.
A battle between prioritizing electability, that restoration model of Newsom,
And the commitment to deep structural change tied to hard numbers and immediate visible household benefits, the transformation model potentially offered by AOC.
the party really is about to decide, it seems, whether they want to just regain and secure power within the existing system, or if they're ready to try and fundamentally change the American system itself.
It's a fascinating dilemma, a really profound choice facing the party, and yeah, one we will definitely be diving back into as this field takes more shape.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.